Think you're still on mute, Naomi. There we
Hello,
are.
everyone.
Everyone,
Hi.
back to the screen. Welcome everyone to our very special highlight of the day. We have Naomi Hirahara with us right now, our guest of honor for an interview. She's going to sit here and answer all the questions we've been burning to ask her. She has a terrific and interesting background and a great array of books. And I think you're going to find whatever she has to say here very enlightening and entertaining, just like her keynote. I must say, I really enjoyed your keynote. I'm going to reread Naomi's bio because I know if you might have been unlucky enough to have missed her keynote, I'm going to give you a little background so you know who she is. Naomi Hirahara is an Edgar Award-winning author of multiple traditional mysteries and noir short stories. Her Masarai mysteries, which have been published in Japanese, Korean, and French, feature a Los Angeles gardener and a Hiroshima survivor who solves crimes. Her first historical mystery, Clark and Division, which won a Mary Higgins Clark Award, follows a Japanese-American family's move to Chicago in 1944 after being released from a California wartime detention center. A former journalist with the Rafushimpo newspaper, Naomi has also written numerous nonfiction history books and curated exhibitions. She's written a middle grade novel, 1001 Cranes. Her follow-up to Clark and Division, Evergreen, was released August 2023. So while we're doing that, I'm just going to hold these up for everybody. Beautiful covers, great books. And I just have to tell you, first of all, stay in the pool and keep swimming is now on a Post-it note attached to my computer for good. It's great advice, and I think everybody should be heeding. My very first question, the first thing I want to know is about your genre choices. I'm partial to your books because they are a cross between literary and mystery, and I'm interested to know how you chose the mystery genre.
I actually didn't choose the mystery genre in the beginning. I was attempting to be a literary novelist, which we all know is actually a genre, in and of itself. But that's my loves in terms of books. Probably is like Louise Erdrich. Um, I loved her Love Medicine, which is a series of linked short stories. And she writes about the Native American community in the Minnesota area. So I was kind of going for something, well, that was an inspiration. And my first attempt at a novel, well, I take that back. There are many attempts, but my serious attempt was from two different points of view. And one was a Masarai character, a Hiroshima survivor, and the other voice was a young doctor from Hiroshima. And so it was alternating voices, and I struggled. I had very many different titles. I think the first title, what was the first title? Oh, LA Shakes was the first title. And there were many others, The Handicaptor, Broken Branches. Um, but it just wasn't getting any traction. And actually, my grandmother, in a way, assisted me in she wasn't aware of that, but the first book does have a lot of gravitas, because I was writing about my family's experience being Hiroshima survivors, right? Although it's set in America, but there's flashbacks. And my grandmother, during the war, she was in Hiroshima. My grandparents ran a stationery store in the city of Hiroshima. And after the bomb fell, she survived, and then she had seen a body, and she drew a picture of it, and it had an identifying name tag, and that served as a way for the family to kind of see what happened. I mean, it sounds very gruesome, but actually, I think it gave the family of this deceased man a degree of closure. So that somehow became a clue in a mystery. And I think there are people that were writers, that both alive and dead, that were walking beside me. And one was a living person, Barbara Neely, Blanche, who wrote the Blanche on the Lamb series, the Blanche White series. One was Chester Himes, dead, and one was like Walter Mosley. So a lot of African American actually detective novelists. And I just kind of was like walking either beside them or behind them. And I go, I think this is the right container for my Masarai series because he's dealing with post-traumatic stress. I need to get him out of his chair and the mystery, something involving the people around him became the inciting incident, the motivating factor. And ever since then, I've kept running in the mystery genre.
And you've succeeded with that because Masarai, he is, there's so much character and there's so much character development, but you're right. You put him there so he's ready with all his skills and his reluctance to work on that mystery. So beautifully done. I know Carol has a follow-up, I think.
Yeah, along the lines of making choices. You were a journalist at one point, which I think is wonderful background for a fiction writer. It gives you an edge, it gives you this insight, and you can, make everything in your books sound more authentic. But you were a writer and an editor at the Rafu Shimpo, the bilingual Japanese American newspaper in LA. So tell us about that, and how did you evolve from being an editor at a newspaper to writing fiction?
Well, I was taking classes at LA Extension. Those are the times, remember the dot matrix printer? Like I would take my little, I don't know if it was a floppy disk, I'd take it to work, I'll print it out, to tear it off and then go to my UCLA class at night. So this was something I was doing concurrently. I mean, the thing I was seeking to do was to write a book, to get a novel published. And it was a journey that took me a very long time, 15 years. But I think, yeah, of so many people, like Michael Connolly worked at the LA Times. At the same time, I was at the smaller newspaper. We were blocks from each other, never knew each other. But I think, and you have Tracy Clark, who was on the panel right before this, and I know she's a trained journalist as well. So we've received the calls, or again, this is way back when we had these like news services that printed out, on this kind of not butcher paper, but that cheap kind of paper. Oh, look at this story. And then we would tear it off and we would be on the phone and talking to the watch commander of the police. And so we're trained to follow the whole story. Yeah, from when the crime was committed to the legal system, the hearing, the arraignment and the hearing and so on. And then we're calling the family, we're, observing the witnesses, we're doing all, some people, I never went to jail to actually talk to the suspect, the arrested individual, but some of my colleagues did. So I think that's wonderful training ground. And also, we get calls from people who are telling us this and that. And we're just wondering, like, everyone's kind of a suspect. Like, why are you calling me? One was this missing woman and the boyfriend, this was at UC Berkeley. He was leading the charge to find her, right? And of course, he was the one who, unfortunately had killed her. So I think we become aware that no one should be trusted. So I think, unfortunately, we are very suspicious. So
No one should be trusted. That's a perfect thing for every mystery writer to keep in the back of their mind as they're doing all of their misdirection and their clues and their red herrings and stuff. I'm going to remember that line.
So I want to start at the beginning, right? The summer of Big Bashi. I've never read a book quite like it. It's unique. And I had read in an interview, and you mentioned it earlier today, but I had read in an interview a while back that Masarai, the Hiroshima survivor and the Gardner sleuth, is modeled after your dad. And so that was a really profound revelation for me because it's such a sensitive issue, right? He really bears his heart and soul. You really let him live on that page. So this had to be very difficult decision and had to be hard for you to do while also maybe being joyful. I'm not sure. And I'd like you to tell us a little bit about that decision and the process. If you're willing. I know
Oh,
it's
for sure. My dad passed away in 2012, and I won't say I was daddy's little girl, but we had a very strong connection. He was one of these, man, a few words, kind of, and he didn't master any language. His English was terrible. I mean, and his Japanese wasn't that great either. But I was raised in this kind of bilingual kind of household, and kind of with its unique language that I was kind of the interpreter, being the oldest child. I had to interpret the world for my parents and interpret what they were saying as well. But yeah, my father was very philosophical, and but I knew strangers who would pass by his, either his pickup truck. It later became like a white van with all his gardening equipment. They wouldn't give him a second thought, right? Truth be told, I probably wouldn't. But he was my father, and I was going, this guy is fascinating, So it was definitely, it was an homage to people like that, who are ignored, who are dismissed, but have this very deep history. And it's not only a Hiroshima survivors, there's so many people like that. So I wanted to give voice to his experience. So that's how it was born. And I think if I weren't close, I mean, he's not totally likable, he's cranky. But if I weren't so close to my father, I don't think I could have written a story like that.
it comes through really beautifully touching.
Yeah.
So, keeping on the same series, the subject of bocce, is that the right pronunciation? That comes up in your Masarai series, especially in the first book, Summer of the Big Bocce. And then also it comes up in the Japantown series. So can you explain what that is, and why is that important to have a place in your books?
Well, I think I have been impacted by a lot of Yiddish writers. I grew up, reading like Ham Potok and some other Jewish, and I think I kind of related to that because like the Yiddish language is kind of disappearing, and this kind of combination of Japanese English is kind of disappearing as well. And but I thought for this particular time, because of who I am, and I lived in a certain period of time in which words like bachi, what goes around comes around. So this is something many people in my generation, they would hear something from like their mother or grandmother. You're going to get big, if you do that, you're going to get big bachi. That's what we heard at home. So for people like me of my generation, that word evokes so much. It evokes fear, it evokes laughter, and I think deeper than that. I mean, what a common motivation for doing something, in terms of crime is revenge, right? And so the concept of bachi, I think, is kind of perfect, but it's also about a person who had done something in the past and is haunted. He feels like any minute he's going to get zapped, he's going to get bachi. And to be perfectly honest, there's been times like as a child, I've done things like inadvertently, hurt someone, didn't mean to, but I think I did feel that weight of bachi. So some of it was personal, as a child, to be honest.
That's
And
interesting. Ending feeling, it comes right out, starting with the title of the book, for example.
yeah, and it wasn't the initial title. And my husband said when it became Summer of the Big Bachi, that kind of using my metaphor, it that was like breathing life into the book. But there's also, I think, a lot larger like societal issue of, but can a nation feel like they're going to get bachi for something they did in the past, so that's another kind of larger concept that, I mean, it wasn't intentional. So many things that we write about is from our subconscious, right? So I'm sure that element was there as well.
I think
Yeah,
that's so subconscious part, right? You see it as you develop a scene or a book, all of a sudden things start to come together that you hadn't planned. I'm sorry, Carol, I cut you off.
No, I was just going to say that it's the perfect concept for a mystery because it applies on so many levels on, for each character's personality. What is their big bocce going to be? And maybe for the community and for the police department, like you say, avenging whatever the crime. And then, for the community at large. I mean, it's the perfect concept, I think, to think about and talk about and write about in a mystery. Yeah.
And I think generally, I mean, actually, especially in my Masarai books, the most controversial aspect is I do use a lot of Japanese words in there, and some people don't like it, but a lot of people do. And I do think mystery readers are very curious. So, and they want to learn. So whenever, to me, I feel like if you can, like, rather than, well, this is the funny story. I was working on it during my honeymoon in Hawaii, and I left it on the conveyor belt of the the Kona airport. I think it was outdoors. And I kind of knew I had done that. And I was just trying not to worry about it when I was in the plane. And then when we got home, my friend was staying at our place and she says, Naomi, you're so dumb. She said, the airport called you because I had put my phone number, on the manuscript. They're going to send your manuscript to you. And my husband was going, someone's going to steal your story. They're going to, instead of Summer of the Big Bachi, they're going to call it The Revenge of King Kamehameha. So yeah, but rather than just saying revenge, right? There's something like, what the heck is bachi? So that's kind of the fun thing you can do with words.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I mean, I think mystery writers are curious in general. I think a lot of us like to learn something new, whether it's art or language or history or a new culture, cooking. I think that's a common denominator among mystery readers.
And it brings me to a question I was going to mention later, but I'm writing a book now that takes place partially in my regular series location of a village in the Hudson Valley and partially in Kyoto, Japan. And I'm curious about how you chose how much Japanese to include, how much to translate, how much culture, because it's like it's a balance, right? But you want to include it. There's so much extra meaning behind some of these words that carry importance. And how did you choose how much to put in?
I will say my first mystery is the most pungent. It's the stinkiest, it's the smelliest, and I don't regret it, but I think it was a lot. And I did, as I went on with the mysteries, I modified it a little. And because some people, I mean, it was funny, even my relatives, people non-Japanese marrying into the family, they were going, Naomi, you needed to put a glossary in there. But I didn't want to put a glossary because some of these terms, like if I defined it, someone else would say, no, that's not the true meaning. There'd be like art, I didn't, and these were words that were spoken in America. So I needed to contextualize it. Some of it was just for me very because I knew the language so well, at least these particular terms, it was like emotion, what words are very emotional and I feel connected to, and other people would, of this community, and how can I take that word and contextualize it? Some of it was just the sound of words, so I did choose certain words that I thought that would be difficult for an American or a non-Japanese speaking person to kind of decipher. I kind of stayed away from for the most part. It's a balancing act. It is a balance. And what's interesting in my current book that's set in Pasadena and it's 1903, I have immigrants that are very educated. So another part of it was also from the view of my characters, like what words would they gravitate towards? And since my characters in this book are, they're actually more fully bilingual, I'm not using as many Japanese words in it. So, especially in the dialogue. So
Right.
it differs. It differs in each situation.
Yeah, I tried to keep mine to individual words or words that I felt had an importance that I really wanted to get across. But I found it, especially in the Masarai book, the first book, is very heavy, but I really enjoyed that. Um, so I want to move on to Clark and Division. So your Japantown series, right? The first book in the series. Let's see if I can get it good. There it is, right? Um, so this is a great title, but it's not just the title of the book, and it's not just a cross street in Chicago. To me, it seems like it represents this community that you've created there, and that little microcosm of what's going on with the Japanese American experience at the time. And you really created a vibrant community. And I think the readers were really able to connect. Can you talk about bringing community to the page? And
Sure. I mean, first I'd like to just talk about titles,
Mhm.
just really briefly, because I think titles and as well as the character names, for me, it's pretty vital. And usually, I mean, I haven't had not had any pushback on any of my titles except for one. And and usually I do have the title pretty early. But with Summer of the Big Bocce, it did go through some changes. But just one funny thing about Clark and Division, one Chicago bookseller told me it was like a genius title in Chicago because people were buying the book without even knowing what it was about because they just gravitated. They go, I know that intersection. So just that's just an aside. But in terms of building the community, I mean, luckily, I mean, it required a lot of research. It required actually going to Chicago before, I decided to write it. I had only gone to Chicago once. And I had gone for this book, I did two in-depth travel visits, research trips to Chicago. They weren't long, but they were very concentrated and I knew exactly. And then what was key were my guides. I had two guides, friends who I had known. One had lived in Los Angeles, and one was more walking and the other was more driving. So, and then, of course, it involved getting eBay. I love eBay. I was getting maps from that particular era. I was getting postcards. Postcards are great because it's color and, whereas photos are just black and white. Looking at oral histories, of course, actually walking those neighborhoods was really important. It's just like being aware of weather issues. I mean, I purposely did not set it during the winter because there's no way this Los Angelino could really depict that. I mean, that's Tracy Clark's area, in terms of the depth of winter. And also it would have been very hard for my character to get around as well. But just like I think I had a line like because it was in May. And then all of a sudden there was a rainstorm like during a funeral. And I think Aki says, like in Chicago, nothing can be trusted, or the weather can, just like the weather, nothing can be trusted. And my friend Eric, who's a native Chicago, and he goes, exactly, you got that exactly right. So it also helped that people actually read my manuscript and said, and who knew about transportation and said, no, Naomi, they cannot get to that cemetery from this particular bus line. But yeah, setting is absolutely necessary. I mean, those are key. And actually, I've determined, like, especially for the Japantown mysteries, my setting is actually the antagonist.
Mm.
So it's like, can my protagonist survive in this setting? So that's kind of key to the
Yeah,
story.
interesting concept. It certainly was the case in the first book. And again, even going back to LA, I know that Carol wanted to ask you a question about Evergreen. I'll hold that book up while she asks the question, because wonderful follow through.
Okay, yes, yes. So my question, keeping in the Japantown series, looking at Evergreen, the second book in the Japantown series picks up Aki's story when the family is finally able to return to LA, but it's not so simple. Their homes, their businesses, work arrangements are no longer waiting for them. So can you share a bit about how you go about incorporating history, how much and which bits to put in, to leave out, to expand on, how you incorporate history into the mystery?
I think you first steep in it. You actually, again, Tracy, she said something about, being like in like the tea bag gets darker, but just steeping yourself in all this research. And once you do that, you kind of just put it aside. And then I don't necessarily, when I get stuck in certain scenes and I have to make them shine, then I'll go back and do research and look at the research. But for the most part, um, there's a reason why certain details stay in my mind. So I know, like, for instance, this is back to Clark and Division. One academic had written, no, it was my friend who was an oral historian, said that these women had lost their periods during when they were in camp. And so maybe verbally they weren't voicing their trauma, but their bodies were. And of course I knew, oh, I have to use that. So it's those nuggets, you don't, sometimes people feel like, and I'm not the type of writer that puts in all this heavy detail. It's just finding that one detail that people can glom onto and say, okay, I know what that is. I know all the complexities of that particular detail. So yeah, so I think, and it probably helps, my journalistic experience probably helps because back in my day, you had only so many inches to write something. So you had to be very, very judicious in what you put in. So yeah, but what I would recommend is just whatever you're writing, whether it's a historical or not, just like dive deep into and do the research and then kind of let it go.
Great.
I thought of the antagonist that you're setting as your antagonist until you said it. And to me, the Chicago setting makes sense because these are, well, a couple of settings, right? Because you go back and forth with the camp or and these families were allowed to relocate into the interior cities like Chicago. So that's an antagonist, like you said, getting situated in a place that's completely foreign to them with almost nothing. And it seems logical, but this idea of that LA might be the antagonist, I would not have thought that, but it's a different LA than the one they left. They're not like Carol said, nothing, their businesses are not there. Not only are they not there, it's not like an abandoned city that they could just unlock the doors and go back in. They've been changed. They've been taken over by other families and other communities. So they're just doing it again. They're starting over for the third time. So you're right, that setting can really be.
And sometimes it's harder when you had a place that you called home, right? And you've been away and then you go back. That's because your memories, you have a lot at stake with that location. And to go back when it's so vastly different and you have to change. You can't live in the exact same place as you used to. That takes a lot of, inner strength, and it's confusing, it's disappointing, it's maddening, it's all those emotions.
So I have another question for you. I recently wrote an essay, maybe, I don't know, 6 months ago or so, what I really write about when I write about murder, because I use my murder mysteries as a way to understand human nature, right? To remind me that, and to remind the readers that ordinary people are rather extraordinary, right? Like your Masarai. And one of the themes of your books, obvious theme is identity, right? And many of your characters, Japanese American characters in particular, have nicknames like Tug and Hammer, Wishbone, Stinky, right? Can you tell us a bit about these chosen names and what purpose they served, what significance they had?
Well, some of it just reflects a real life, because a lot of these Nisei, the children of these Japanese immigrants, on one hand, you would look at them, oh, they look very distinguished, or they're very, they don't voice complaint, you would say these things, but then they would have these really crazy nicknames. I remember once at the paper, we got an obituary for this older woman in her 80s, and in quotation marks, it said Porky. But to me, it's like humor. It's like that's the way they kind of reflected humor by, and it's like usually it was a name they grew, a sibling or a friend, just kind of called them that name, and it kind of stuck through their whole life. And so I kind of loved that. So I wanted to reflect that in the work. And I will say this, I mean, I write about, pretty serious topics. However, I think it's really important to have some level of humor in there. There needs to be some kind of relief for the reader. So you can do it in all sorts of ways. I mean, you don't have to tell it in jokes, but just even like a Masarai who's so crotchety, and he's so, set in his ways. He doesn't have he has a flip phone at some point, he's like complaining, and we kind of all can relate to that. So that in a sense you know, is funny.
It's true. There's a humor in his demeanor that's not slapstick, but like you said, we all know that grumpy old man kind of thing, and we enjoy it. It still just turns up your smile. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. There has to be some relief and some delight in reading our books, right? We write it in the mystery genre.
Yeah. Well, this is a perfect segue to my next question. On a lighter note, one thing that Tina and I have found in common, whether we're at this conference online, whether we're at conferences in person, events, wherever we go, everybody is always eager to know about your writing process. Do you outline? Do you create characters, then just let them go? Do you do characters first, or plot first, or setting? So how do you create a book?
It depends on the book, and it has changed throughout the years. I know with Masarai, I did not have an outline, and that may have be why it took me 15 years to actually. So I don't know if it's totally recommended, but I think for the first book too, I always say it's kind of like baking a cake for the first time. You're not quite sure what you're doing. Like you don't really have a recipe. You're just, okay, I'll throw in that baking powder and baking soda, and oh, it didn't come out. Okay, I'll do this and do that. And you're just learning. And after that first book, at least for me, it's like, okay, I get the general concept of what I need, uh, in terms of the chemistry and all that to make this cake. And so I'm going to vary it according to the book or character. With Clark and Division, it was more of a Stephen King on writing. A method in which he comes up with these concepts, and it was like, okay, I'm going to write about a younger sister. Something terrible happens to the older sister. Can the younger sister kind of take her parents and herself through this and avenge her, get to the truth of what happened to her sister? So it was a little more of a concept. Of course, I knew the setting and the circumstance, so there was that added part of it. But so with that method, actually, it was like, a dominoes lining up and just knocking one of the dominoes. And it was very organic. Actually, that plot went very well. With the book I'm writing now, it's a little more difficult because it's not like that very strong. It has an inciting incident, but it's not as dramatic as in Clark and Division. And it's more like spider webs, so it could go in all sorts of ways. And in that case, sometimes it starts going the wrong way. So I'm trying to adjust it accordingly. And I think with that method, so I have the characters. I know who my characters are very well, but it's kind of like the plot. So I'm having for this one to kind of to plot it out. It's kind of weird, but I actually separated it out into, I think I have 11 acts or something like that with small chapters. It's a different way of writing. Um, so I try to adjust it for each book, but I will say this, the most important thing to get is the voice of your characters in your book. And that's a crucial. I mean, you could adjust the plot anytime, but in terms of to rewrite the voice, that's a major operation. So um, that's the thing I focus on the most.
Do you keep a Bible, like so many writers do for your characters?
I don't. At one point I did start doing a chronology of Masarai. I have a it might have diminished, but I have a pretty good brain for like keeping. And then you know what? One thing that helped was I actually used my father's life. The personality actually is kind of different than my father, um, because Moss is so much of a curmudgeon. But in terms of the timeline of his life and the things that, where he was in different times, I cheat. I don't know if it's that cheating, but I used my father's chronology just because I didn't want to spend so much time. Like, would it be possible for Moss to be in America at this time? I didn't want to worry about that. I just wanted to kind of inhabit his character and just slide down that hill with him.
That saves some research too. I mean,
Hmm.
if this was a situation or a location in your father's life, it's real, it's possible in the story. Sticking with the writing, some of us have writing rituals. Some people can only write at a certain location. Some people need coffee or tea or water. Some people need background noise, music. Do you have any writing rituals
Um, I do
or
not.
habits?
I do not because, and I think also that's from working at a newspaper during the era that people smoked in the office. Do you remember that? I'm a non-smoker. So I had this like filter that was supposed to, absorb all the smoke. And there were men at that time, there were mostly men in the newsroom. They're talking sports, and I had to like, so I think it was good in that sense. But I will say during the pandemic, that's when I won't say I had writer's block, but it was more difficult for me. So that's why now I sprint. I do writing sprints. I'm a morning person, and I know Kim, is uh part of this whole the Sisters in Crime like writing sprint webinars. So for those of you who need some kind of structure in your writing, I highly recommend that. I do one with a Sarah Chen, my friend who lives in another part of Southern California. So we go on Discord at 8 o'clock in the morning, right before. Are you ready? And then we do it a sprint, 25-minute sprint, and then take a break. And if, we're still around, we'll do another. And the one thing that's really wonderful about these sprints is that usually I'm not super prolific. I mean, I maybe do 200 words per sprint. So maybe I have 400 or 500 words by 9 o'clock in the morning. But it's such kind of a relief. Like I have 500 words or I have 400 words. I still have to write later in the day, but just knowing that I've done something
Yeah.
is really helpful. And I think that's why we get blocked. Like it's just like exercise or whatever. I'll just wait. We procrastinate, and pretty soon it's like really late at night, and then we feel guilty, right? So I think even doing like 250 words a day. If you try to do that on a regular basis, you're going to have a book in a year. But they have to be pretty good words, and you can't just remove. That's the tricky part. But if you can come up with 250 words a day, you'll have a book in a year.
Also, it's it's validation, it's self-gratifying, you've done it, it gives you momentum. Like you said, you're going to write later, maybe you'll write 1,100 words later in the day, and maybe those first 250 need to be heavily edited, but you've got momentum. So yeah, I agree.
I do this too. I don't know about you guys, but all my friends, they give me journals. And I have a couple of friends who are really part of the Buy Nothing movement. I don't know if you know about that with Facebook. You just get free stuff, and my friends get like a stack of journals, and they go, "Here, Naomi," and it's like, "Oh my gosh, what am I going to do with all these journals?" But I kind of pick visually, like, okay, this is my next book. Which one of these journals is going to be the right one? And then I just do free writing in that when I'm, like, what might my characters be? That's when I'm kind of brainstorming. So it's kind of cool because I have, all these different colored notebooks, with just the bare bones of my different novels. So I think that's kind of helpful. And I think there's something for me about actually handwriting. Um, some of my colleagues at Soho, Eli Craner, he handwrites everything, the whole book. It's like incredible. Um, but I won't go that far, but I do think there's something to be said about handwriting.
You were talking about nailing the voice, and once you have the voice, then the rest, right, will fit. But you need the voice. Without it, you have nothing. And that's what I use the free writing for. And that's what I use handwriting for in journals, because I'll write in my character's voice, maybe the beginning of a short story or a scene or whatever, just to hear and feel, get in there. And it may never have anything to do with the book, but
What's been in What's interesting is with the Masarai books, they're all third person. And but now I'm primarily using first person.
that was
And
my
oh, okay. And I really love first person because I feel like that's what I'm bringing to the book. Like I don't want, like with the Moss was such a difficult character because he's not that talkative. So you almost need an interpreter, right? And the narrator kind of serves as that interpreter. But like with Aki, I figured, I want to go right to her head. I want the readers to know exactly what she's thinking. There's no separation. There's no interpretation. And yeah, and I think ironically, I think with historical, I think younger people, because I've gotten this comment from some younger readers like, "Oh, I don't like historicals, but I really like this book." And I do think maybe because it's written in first person, that was like an easier entree for younger readers.
sounds like. I see a message in the chat that goes with what we're talking about. Do you edit as you go or reread what you wrote the previous day?
I used to reread what I wrote the previous day. I used to do, and maybe that's why the first book took so long. I would read and then I would adjust, print it out and adjust, and then I would go. And the thing, and I have friends who do that. And the good thing is, if you keep doing that, you don't have to go back and readjust. But now I jump around. If there's a particular scene, and it could be way down in the book that speaks to me, I'll just go and out of sequence and I'll just start writing that particular scene. It's chancy, there's a risk to it because as you write it chronologically, that scene may not make the most sense. But I've just found, yeah, so I jump around. And in a way, it's kind of like a sign, it's like I'm like a sheep farmer. I don't know, a cow, a rancher, and I find a post and I hammer it down. I hammer it down. I haven't done the fencing to, connect everything, but I have a general sense of, yeah, this is the place to put that piece of wood, that's going to connect my whole story.
I like
Yeah.
around when I need like when I need to jumpstart, like if I had to step away from writing and and then I'm trying to re-enter my manuscript, I'll pick a scene, like you said, that's important to me because I know it'll come out. And it's kind of like a definite positive experience.
And
Somebody,
and if you're in like in the middle or like 3/4, you can't read. I used to like always read it takes a long time to read this. One thing I never did until recently was read out loud. I know a lot of people, like Jess Laurie, a lot of people recommend you read everything out loud, especially towards the end. I find it so tedious to do that, and it takes so long, but it's so helpful. And I find so many mistakes. And I think that's why I don't want to read it out loud. I don't want to, like, why did I do that? But towards the end, I would really recommend that people read their work out loud.
oh, do we have any more questions before we go on? Just want to make
Caught up.
nothing. Follow
Yeah.
up, Jennifer, who asked the editing question. Do you heavily outline or plot? I think you may have answered that it was evolved, right?
Mhm.
If a pantser, how do you make the clues and red herrings line up with the whodunit?
I'm one of these people, I don't like the word pantser. And it's not only because I guess in the UK, like they don't like that word. I guess it refers to underpants or something. I don't know. But anyway, because I think intuitively, whether we identify ourselves as a pantser or non-pantser or whatever, or plotter, we kind of know all of us should be voracious readers. And I kind of liken it to music. Like we kind of know, okay, for us to be satisfied, we need a beat here. We need a beat here. It may be more intuitive thing than a thing we, actually express on the page in an outline, but we know up here what needs to get done. So, yeah. So it really, I don't heavily outline, but again, it's kind of like, as Mari said, the post hole, the posts. I do have certain posts that I roughly know I have to reach. Many times I don't know who did it. I would say in most cases, I'm not really sure until maybe I'm 3/4 or 2/3, and then it becomes more apparent. And I kind of like that method because I think the reader's more surprised too. And if I know from the very beginning, I think maybe the way I write is too leading, and not as surprising. But what's key in terms of, well, the red herrings with my Masa Rai books, the clues were crucial because I was dealing with how come this gardener is solving these crimes that, the LAPD, and there's one book that's in New York, the NYPD can't solve, and it has to be a clue that Masa Rai is familiar with. So I think if you're, working in the amateur sleuth area, your clue is super important, in my opinion, and you should really consider that. And that's kind of the fun of doing research. Like if I don't know, if you're doing something in a bakery, there's some kind of tool or some kind of thing in terms of baking, back to the chemistry that only a baker would know. Then you could seek your teeth into that and like, okay, this is the clue. And then from there, kind of figure out, well, who did it if it's going to be this type of clue. So that's kind of a fun way to do it. And in terms of red herring, I mean, you got to have your suspects, you got to build your suspects. And I think with Clark and Division, I knew every male was a suspect. And and I had to seed that suspicion with every person, even if they were so congenial or lovely. There's still something, and maybe it's back to my journalism days, like you were saying, everyone is a suspect, everyone's suspicious.
Very good. We have oh, Carol, did you have a question about women you wanted to
Yeah,
ask?
I was just thinking I'd like to ask that one now because it's a nice little segue. And actually, before I do, your comment about you like the surprise, Naomi, that you don't quite know who your killer is. I'm like that too. And I have a quote over my computer on my desk by Robert Frost, and he said, "No emotion in the writer, no emotion in the reader, no surprise in the writer, no surprise in the reader." And I think that's one of the great advantages about, not outlining too strictly. Don't suffocate all the life out of it. So yes, coming back to men and women characters, I love the way the women in your books are underestimated. And it seems to me more than the usual way the trope is used, but more than what we usually see. And I thought possibly this was enhanced by the patriarchal nature of Japanese culture, but I don't know if that's right or not. Can you talk about that a little?
Well, I mean, I think even beyond the culture, I think it's our society, and the American society in the 1940s. And I took a class in college called Women in Cities, and we looked into different cities like in Saudi Arabia, in America, and different places. And women, we can't, especially in a certain era, we can't move freely, in certain places, right? And like a character like Masarai, even though he's like an old man, old Japanese man, he can go into certain spaces that a woman cannot. And I think that concept is very fascinating. And I think for me as a reporter too, and we were right next to Skid Row, and I wrote about like homeless or unhoused people. Like this was way back in the 80s and 90s. So I think I'm kind of experienced in going into those places, and that kind of that lack of freedom that women have had even today, because we won't go in certain places, right, that we feel are unsafe, and that's a legitimate concern. I find that fascinating, and I guess this is maybe not wise of me. I'm kind of attracted to those dark places. And I, grew up more in the suburbs. I grew up in Pasadena, South, very beautiful areas. My husband actually grew up in the Evergreen area, in the Boyle Heights area. And he will not go in certain neighborhoods because he knows better. But I don't know better, but I'm attracted.
Brilliant. We only have about 7 or 8 minutes, well, about 6 or 7 minutes. I wanted to give you an opportunity to, if you'd like, to talk a little bit about the Little Tokyo short story contest. Is that something you're involved with every year, or just the last couple of years, or?
I've been involved since the very inception. And this is our 11th annual year. Yeah. And it's really great. So we've gotten like maybe around 100 submissions in different categories. And it's my way of still being involved in my particular community. And it's not political. It's just like fun. And uh dealing with different language. It's bilingual. We have a category in Japanese, and it's intergenerational because we have kids, so a youth category. And yeah, so I just would really recommend people, I mean, we're so involved with the mystery community, but also to look in other ways that we can be involved with either writing or our local community. And it's kind of a way, I mean, I'm not saying it for a transactional purpose, but I think when we're involved with different communities too, that's a way to kind of bring people to our writing. And they get to know us, they get to trust us, and they want to see what we do, so that's kind of a good way to build those kind of relationships.
I agree. I belong to Writers in Kyoto, as a matter of fact, because I do have a connection to Kyoto, and it is not a mystery writing community. It's a writing community, and it's a different thing. There are some mystery writers, but it's a different way to reach an audience. It's a different way to get support and community. And we also have a flash fiction, I guess you would call it, a short competition every year. But you're right. I think that kind of spreading your wings in different areas is wonderful.
And it
Tell-
has to be fun, it can't be a burden.
That's,
It has,
that's
and
my
it,
fun. And can you tell us a little bit about your reading habits? What you're reading now, recommendations if you want, anything that inspired you?
well, this is something, Tina, you would appreciate. I picked up this book. I don't know if you heard of it, the Kamogawa Food Detectives. It's like very popular in Japan, I guess, and it was just recently translated into English here. And
Yeah.
I have to admit, right now I kind of appreciate thin books that are easier reads, like comfort reads. I'm asked to do a lot of blurbing. So, in that sense, I have to devote time to blurb. I enjoy reading nonfiction. So I do a lot of that too. And I kind of have to do it for my historical fiction as well. But
Oh, I see Sarah's in the chat, Aoyama. She said that she read the Kamigawa.
yeah, it's total. Yeah, it's a different way to structure a mystery. So it's short. And so I have been listening. I do a lot of audiobooks from Libby, from the library. And I explore other genres, not only my genres, but different, espionage and spy and different things. So I highly recommend that too, for people, maybe you don't have time to read so many. I know all of us have these huge to be read piles, but maybe just